I wasn't looking for answers about my life. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't even curious. I was just finishing routine paperwork at work when I saw my own name on a file I shouldn't have been reviewing. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Same name, same age maybe. But then I saw my birth date, my address, my mother listed as emergency contact, and that's when my chest tightened. Because according to the official record in front of me, I had never legally existed the way I believed I had. Not once, not on paper, not in any system that mattered. And the most unsettling part wasn't that it looked wrong. It was that it looked old, finalized, approved, and quietly accepted years ago without me ever knowing. I work a normal office job. Nothing secretive, nothing dramatic, just forms, databases, verification. The kind of work where you stop thinking about people and start thinking in checkboxes. That afternoon felt exactly the same as every other one. Fluorescent lights humming above me, stale coffee sitting on my desk, my brain already halfway home. I was clearing older records, the boring backlog no one likes to deal with, scrolling, approving, closing tabs. Then I saw my name. That happens more often than you'd think. Shared names are common. Normally, I don't even pause. This time, I did. I don't know why. Maybe it was the address, same street I grew up on. Maybe it was the date of birth, same month, same day. I leaned closer to the screen. My mother's name was listed as emergency contact. That's when I stopped pretending it was coincidence. I told myself it was a duplicate profile, a system error, something boring with a boring explanation. I opened the file expecting to confirm that and move on. Instead, the first line made my stomach feel heavy. The classification field didn't match what it should have. At first, I assumed I was misreading it. These systems use outdated terms sometimes, fields nobody updates because they're buried deep. I scrolled back up, checked the header, checked the notes, checked the history log. No flags, no corrections, no edits. The entry had been created more than 15 years ago and never touched again. That's when the discomfort set in. Not panic, not fear, just that quiet sense that something very basic was off. Like finding a familiar room in your house and noticing one wall is slightly closer than it used to be. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen longer than I should have. I kept waiting for the obvious explanation to appear, some small note I missed, some technical detail that would make me feel stupid for overthinking it. It never came. According to the record, my legal status had been categorized differently from day one, not recently, not by mistake, from the start. I felt irritated more than scared. Irritated that something this personal could be wrong without anyone noticing. Irritated that my entire life apparently fit neatly into a system that didn't describe me correctly. I told myself to close the file. This wasn't my job to investigate, this wasn't personal. But I didn't close it. I scrolled again, slower this time, reading every line, every timestamp, realizing that whatever this was, it wasn't new and it wasn't accidental. And for the first time, I wondered how many other things in my life only made sense because I never questioned the paperwork behind them. I didn't tell anyone that day. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't yet have language for what I was looking at. It felt unfinished, like stopping a sentence in the middle. I closed the file before leaving work, but it stayed open in my head the entire drive home. Traffic lights changed, radios played, people crossed streets, and everything looked normal in a way that felt mildly offensive. At home, I ate dinner on autopilot. My partner talked about her day. I nodded at the right moments. I waited for some internal alarm to go off, some emotional reaction that would tell me this mattered. It didn't. Not yet. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I opened my laptop again. I didn't access work systems, I didn't break rules. I did what anyone would do first. I checked my own documents. Birth certificate, school records, tax forms, old emails. Everything I had ever trusted as proof of myself. At a glance, nothing looked wrong. Names matched, dates matched,
But when I slowed down, when I stopped skimming and started reading, I noticed something small. On my birth certificate, the registration date wasn't the same as my birth date. That alone isn't rare. Hospitals submit paperwork late all the time. But this gap was longer than normal, weeks longer. I brushed it off, told myself I was searching for problems now. Then I checked my first school enrollment form. The handwriting on the guardian section looked unfamiliar, not my mother's. I stared at it longer than I should have. I pulled out an old folder my mom kept with childhood documents. The papers smelled like dust and time. Inside were copies of forms I'd never actually read before. I'd always assumed they said what they were supposed to say. That assumption felt lazy now. One form listed a previous address I didn't recognize. Another listed a guardian signature that wasn't my father's. None of it screamed danger. That was the unsettling part. It all looked administrative, boring, acceptable. The kind of inconsistencies no one questions because they're surrounded by enough correct details to feel safe. I sat on the floor longer than I planned, papers spread around me, trying to assemble a timeline without jumping to conclusions. I wasn't thinking about conspiracies or secrets. I was thinking about process, about how systems work, about how once something is entered and approved, it becomes truth by default. That night, I slept badly, not from fear, but from mental noise. My brain kept replaying the same question in different forms. When did this version of me get decided? The next morning, I called my mother. I didn't accuse, I didn't hint, I asked a neutral question about an old address I found on a form. There was a pause. Not long, just long enough. She answered calmly, said she didn't remember, said it must be a clerical thing. Her voice didn't crack, mine didn't either. We changed the subject. After the call ended, I didn't feel relieved. I felt confirmed. Not that she was lying, but that she knew there was more context than she was giving. And that meant this wasn't just paperwork drifting out of alignment. It was paperwork placed that way on purpose, quietly, early, and never corrected because correcting it would require someone to admit a decision had been made without me.
I stopped looking for one clean answer after that, because real life doesn't hide behind a single reveal. It spreads itself thin across years and small decisions that felt harmless at the time. Instead of asking what went wrong, I started asking who benefited from things staying exactly the way they were. At work, I pulled similar archived records, not to compare identities, but to understand how systems behave when no one challenges them. What I noticed was uncomfortable. Early entries rarely get revisited, approvals almost never get questioned, and once something survives long enough in a database, it stops looking like a decision and starts looking like truth. That's when it clicked. This wasn't an error that slipped through. It was a choice that aged into fact. That thought didn't make me angry, it made me tired, because anger assumes intent, and this felt more like convenience. Somewhere, years ago, someone decided it was easier if I existed on paper a certain way. Easier for benefits, easier for custody records, easier for explanations no one wanted to revisit. And once it worked, once there were no consequences, there was no reason to reopen it. I went back into the system one last time and followed the approval trails slowly. Timestamps, departments, silent handoffs, everything lined up too cleanly. No corrections, no disputes, no secondary review, just a smooth path forward that assumed agreement from everyone involved, including me. That was the part that landed the hardest. Not that my identity might be different, but that I never consented to the version of it that mattered most. Not because someone was cruel, but because no one thought I needed a say. I thought about my parents, about the time they raised me in, about how often adults make permanent choices for children believing they're protecting them. Maybe they were. Maybe this was the least damaging option back then. But protection that removes truth doesn't disappear. It just waits. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't request corrections. Not yet.
because changing it wouldn't just rewrite the past, it would create questions in the present, and I wasn't sure I was ready to answer those out loud. That night, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Nothing looked different. My voice, my face, my life all felt the same, but the certainty underneath them was thinner. I realized identity isn't just about where you come from, it's about whether you ever had a choice in the story you're living. And once you notice that choice was taken quietly, you can't unnotice it. I didn't feel broken, I felt unfinished, and unfinished things don't stay quiet for long.